All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about a poem from the 17th century by a guy named John Dryden. And on the surface, it looks like just a simple Bible story. But if you look a little closer, beneath all the fancy poetry and the names you might recognize, there's a hidden message. And it's not just any message, it's a political attack so sharp and so targeted that it was meant to change the entire course of English history.
So that's the real mystery we're going to try and crack here. Was Absalom and Achitophel just a faithful retelling of a famous Bible story? Or was it a masterfully disguised piece of political propaganda? You know, the answer really shows you just how powerful words can be, how literature itself can become a kind of weapon. All right, so first, let's peel back that first layer. Let's talk about the cover story, the biblical mask that Dryden so cleverly used. So the story he picked, you'll find it right in the Old Testament in the book of 2 Samuel. It's this incredibly dramatic and tragic story about Absalom, who was King David's handsome, super popular son. But he gets tricked, he gets manipulated into leading a rebellion against his own dad. I mean, it's got everything: ambition, betrayal, family drama, even civil war. A classic story, for sure. But see, Dryden wasn't just dusting off an old Bible story for fun. No way. He was using a very specific, very powerful tool, something called verse satire. Now, this isn't just, making jokes in poetry, it's way more sophisticated. It's about using beautiful, elegant language to call out corruption and to absolutely tear down your political enemies with incredibly sharp wit. And let me tell you, Dryden was a grand master at this game. So, why the disguise? Why hide his real message inside a Bible story? Well, the reason is simple, and it's pretty explosive. Dryden wasn't really writing about ancient Israel. Not at all. He was writing about his England, right then and there. An England that was basically about to fall apart. And this, right here, is where things get really interesting. This poem wasn't just some commentary from the sidelines. It was designed to be a direct intervention, dropped right into the middle of a political firestorm. Every single character, every twist in the plot was a direct stand-in for a real person or a real event happening in London at that very moment. Okay, so to really understand what Dryden was doing, you have to get the vibe of the times. Just a few years earlier, in 1678, this completely made-up conspiracy theory called the Popish Plot just explodes, and it kicks off this massive wave of anti-Catholic paranoia across the whole country. This panic leads straight into something called the Exclusion Crisis, which was this huge political fight to stop the king's brother, who was a Catholic, from ever becoming the next king. The tension was just off the charts. I mean, people were genuinely afraid another civil war was about to break out. And the heart of the crisis was this. King Charles II didn't have any legitimate kids to inherit the throne. That meant the next in line was his brother, James. The problem? James was a Catholic. So you had this really powerful group in Parliament who were totally freaked out by the idea of a Catholic king. They tried everything to pass a law to exclude James from the line of succession. So who was their guy? Who did they want instead? Well, they backed the king's illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth. He was Protestant, he was handsome, and he was incredibly popular with the people. Okay, so with all that in mind, you now have the key that unlocks the entire poem. So let's lay it all out. Let's map these biblical characters to the real people walking the streets of London. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The parallels are just incredibly direct. So the wise but troubled King David from the Bible, that's King Charles II. The good-looking, popular but rebellious son, Absolam, that's the Duke of Monmouth. And the really sneaky, treacherous advisor, Achitophel, the one whispering poison in Absalom's ear, well, that's the Earl of Shaftesbury, the guy leading the whole charge to exclude James. So, in the poem, Dryden paints King David, who is really King Charles, as this wise, patient, maybe even a little too forgiving ruler. He's the symbol of legitimate authority, of stability. He's the steady hand the country needs to get through this massive political storm. Then you've got Absalom, our Duke of Monmouth. He gets a much more tragic treatment. Dryden doesn't paint him as pure evil or anything. Instead, he's the super charismatic guy. The people love him. But he has this fatal flaw: ambition. And, most importantly, he's being used by other more cunning people. He's basically a pawn in their game. And that brings us to Achitophel. This is where you see who Dryden's main target really was. The Earl of Shaftesbury, disguised as Achitophel, is without a doubt the villain of the poem. He's portrayed as this brilliant but completely treacherous politician who's only in it for himself. He talks about patriotism and religion, but really it's all just a cover for his own thirst for power. This is where Dryden's wit is just absolutely razor sharp.
So this all begs a pretty big question. Why did Dryden even write this thing? This wasn't just him showing off his poetry skills. No, this was a calculated political hit job. It was designed from the ground up to be an intervention in this crisis. See, you have to remember, John Dryden wasn't some random poet sitting in a coffee shop. He was the official poet laureate. He was the historiographer royal. His job was, quite literally, to be the king's writer, the literary defender of the monarchy. He was a loyal supporter of King Charles II, and he wrote this poem for one reason and one reason only: to fight for the king's cause. So the whole point of the poem was to sway public opinion. By wrapping up this political fight in a Bible story, Dryden was making a brilliant argument. He was telling people that going against King Charles wasn't just a political disagreement, it wasn't just treason, it was a sin. He was making this powerful case for the divine right of kings, for stability, and basically giving everyone a terrifying warning of what would happen if they chose rebellion, chaos, and another bloody civil war.
So where does that leave us? What's the lasting impact of a poem like this? I mean, why are we still talking about it hundreds of years later?
Well, there's a quote that really hits the nail on the head. Literature can serve as both a mirror of politics and a weapon against instability. And that's exactly what Dryden's poem was. It was a mirror, right? It perfectly reflected the political chaos of the era. But it was also a weapon aimed squarely at his opponents in defense of the king. And that's really the key thing to remember here. Absolam and Achitophel is so much more than just a clever poem. It's a masterclass in how art can be used to influence politics. By framing the entire crisis with this powerful, timeless story, Dryden didn't just write about history, he actually helped decide how future generations would see it. And that leaves us with a question that honestly is just as relevant today as it was back then. Dryden used his incredible talent, his art, to fight a very real political war. And it really makes you think, where's the line? When does art, a poem, a song, a movie, stop being just art and become something else? A tool, a piece of propaganda, or maybe even a weapon?